is the beginning of a radical transition in agriculture in our country. They went from being the dominant employment group, 25% in 1929. After the Great Depression, crops fell, or as we went into it, crop prices fell by as much as 60%. And the response, and oftentimes much more, there was a period where corn price actually hit zero, that there was no value to the crops they were producing, and the farmers' reaction was to produce more crops. If they only grew more, they'd be able to get more income, and obviously law of supply and demand didn't support that. And the result was that they went from 25% of the workforce to the majority of farmers not owning the land that they worked on, and then on into 25% unemployment in the mid-30s as we really got deep into the Depression. And we went in 1935 from over 6.8 million farmers in this country to today we have fewer than 1 million, providing food for a significantly larger population. It became possible as we recovered economically for more food to be grown with less labor. And we got the increased mechanization with better equipment. We got more sophisticated processing and production processes. We began to shift our crops more to commodity crops and more away from the traditional vegetable products, more into commodity crops that could actually be broken down, getting more into the 50s and 40s and 50s, where the science began to become very efficient at breaking down the elements of corn and soybean primarily, and reconstituting those into processed food, which really not only were there increased efficiencies, but there was a huge centralization of land and of labor in the process. Thinking about that in the context of what we know today about our food system, what are some of the consequences of that we've seen, that you see in your, when you go to the store, when you think about how we feed our families today?
In 1950, kids could recognize the relationship between plants and animals and what they had on their table. And we do down-home farm days, and we have a chicken out there laying an egg. I think a lot of kids are amazed that a chicken lays an egg. And I have friends who have never seen wheat, the grain wheat. They see flour, and if you go back to the 50s, when you had a harvest, they would shut down school and everybody would go out and help harvest. But now a lot of the crops are designed so they can be mechanically harvested, and you don't need to do that. There's been a real transition to recognizing your food.
Very, very efficient, and with a lot of hidden, not so hidden, but maybe not so well understood consequences. And I would say that actually is it's a great point to think of this image and these men as a metaphor for modern day consumers, because in the same way that they are disconnected from their land and their livelihood, we've really become disconnected from our source of food. We don't know where our food comes from. If you buy it from the center of a grocery store, you really have a hard time knowing what's actually in it. We don't really understand seasonality much anymore.
That's true.
You can walk in and buy strawberries in February. I couldn't even do that when I was growing up. So that's recent history change. And I think back in my great uncle was a farmer in this area, and he actually carved his niche out as this industrialization and homogenization took place. He found the things that were too perishable to travel across the country at that point in time with that technology, and grew them in abundance and sold them at all the grocery stores around here. So it was interesting. I think his generation, as it died out, really became the end in many ways for a period of time of what was left of local food economy.
I think one of the things is we don't know how our food travels. You don't know that once it's picked fresh, if it's been frozen, refrozen, or how it's gotten here. And to me, that's one of the big problems, not being local, that you just don't know what, it might have been great intentions at the beginning, but by the time it got here, it wasn't. So.
Well, no matter how fresh it was when they picked it, food begins to lose nutrient value the minute it's picked. And the longer it's in transit, especially if it's genetically bred to be transported rather than to be eaten fresh and healthy. You're right, we've lost a great deal, both in knowledge and in nutrient value.
You know, almost everything at the store has meat in it, and it's just, we don't think of the cost of where that comes from. And that there's no connection between the people that raise those animals and what happens to them. There's really there's no personal connection at all. It's just sort of like just like a big farm, just with plenty of animals.
Yeah, that's why with the work we do at Gaining Ground, transparency is the word we use a lot. We think it's really important. It's why we focus on supporting farms that are within 100 miles of Chattanooga, because it's close enough that you can know your farmer. And if you know your farmer, even if you don't know their name, you know the food. You can find out how it was raised. You can actually go to Sequatchie Cove Farm, or go up to 10 Mile, Tennessee, and see Dave Waters' pigs that are being served at restaurants around town. And we can begin to have that relationship again, where I would argue even as recently as 10, 15 years ago, that was hard to do. We actually grow more beef and poultry by about 5 times as many chickens and maybe 7 times as much beef as we consume in this area, but almost all of it goes to auction to industrial feeding operations to be processed and then brought back into town prepackaged. It's not something that those of us who have values similar to what you just expressed would really endorse. I mean, it's great when they're still here, but once they go into that invisible industrial system, we really don't know what happens. And I think the industry really depends on that and only exists today because of that. Because most of us, if we did know, if we could visually trace the food back when we looked at it on the grocery store shelves, we probably wouldn't eat most of what we eat today. We are very interested in, I mean, it's a change of an entire economic sector. I mean, it's like turning the Titanic. We talked about beef a minute ago. There's so much beef raised here, but the practices, the people are accustomed to raising them up to a certain weight and then selling them. So it does involve education and opportunities for those who are interested to learn how to maybe have more intensive grazing practices, how to shift to grass finish instead of export for finish elsewhere. If you do that, we need more processing, so there needs to be infrastructure developed. If you do that, you have gaps in the distribution process. So we've got to work with distributors to figure out how to work more effectively with small farms and to market those products in a way that honors the farm and the way the products grow and gets more of the value to the farmer for putting that effort into it. So we've spent a lot of time getting around to doing this work for 2 years now. We spend a lot of time listening, a lot of time networking. I mean, a lot of the hard-working farmers that I know and that we work with, they depend on second incomes to keep their farms going. They depend on retirement plans or inherited land or any number of ways to make the farming manageable. And that's not right. It's its own form of social injustice right there. They're hardworking people who, I would argue, deserve the dignity of living wage for their work.